Nicole was suddenly awoken at midnight by the sound of hooves moving swiftly across the pavement outside in the distance. A sound familiar to her and the rest of the village. She heard the horseman coming closer before the galloping could be heard from just outside her window. Halloween had arrived, and the Headless Horseman signaled its arrival. She knew better than to look outside. All she did was listen, and hoped that the horseman would pass by her house. The screams of the unlucky few that found themselves in its way were horrifying to young Nicole's ears. Her parents had convinced her that she was safe as long as she never got caught outside at night during the season of the hunt. Halloween goes by a different name to the residents of Hollow Village. To them, it is the season of the hunt. For every year in October, the Headless Horseman began his hunt, the search for the perfect head to sit atop its shoulders. When morning came and Nicole stepped outside her house, she saw bodies piled outside, all missing their heads. All of the heads were found dumped by the lake. The thought that the horseman had yet to find the perfect head filled Nicole with dread. She feared for her village's safety, prayed that the horseman would finally find what it is looking for, with hope that it will mean the end of the hunt. Night came again, too quickly for Nicole's liking, as she dreaded hearing those hooves galloping across the concrete again. When the clock struck 12, and as Nicole lay terrified in her bed, she heard the fear-inducing sound of the horseman outside, and her worst nightmare became a reality. The horseman stopped right outside her house, and she heard it dismount. She felt compelled to peek outside her window. She calmed herself as best as she could, and peeked outside. She saw a black horse with red glowing eyes, but the rider was nowhere to be seen. She jumped at the sound of the front door being smashed in. She heard both her parents rush out from their room, and she heard them both shouting, before their voices turned to screams of pain, and then silence. Nicole was frozen with fear. She stood motionless as the sound of heavy footsteps got closer to her room, and then stopped directly in front of her bedroom door. A violent force caused the door to fly off its hinges, and Nicole closed her eyes. By Halloween's end, there were multiple accounts of people in the village claiming they saw the horseman with a head sitting atop its shoulders. The head of a young girl. Jacob twisted the key, locking up the theater for the night. The theater was old and dingy, but just closed on a fairly successful marathon of classic slasher films for Halloween. Every customer and employee alike were gone, leaving him with a dark theater and an even darker parking lot. He sighed. He was used to locking up at night, but it always gave him the chills, like someone was watching. He headed to his car, the only vehicle in the barren lot. He was halfway to it when he heard a noise, a sound coming from behind him. Someone was looking at the posters on the front of the building. The film's coming soon. They had their head tilted to the side, like they didn't know what they were looking at. They were dragging something down the plastic frame of the pictures, but whatever it was, Jacob couldn't see.
"Hey, buddy, we're closed for the night,"
he yelled, feeling uneasy with the loiter. Maybe they were drunk, or perhaps lost. Jacob stopped, his car only a few feet away.
"Hey man, you hear what I said? We're closed. You gotta get out of here,"
he said, and suddenly the man turned. Jacob felt the stab of fear like ice in his veins, and his legs felt weak. The man's bottom jaw was missing, the horrible mass that was his tongue swaying as he turned. His nose and eyes were also gone, bloody pits residing in their place. He held up a hatchet, its blade catching the light. That was when he started running. Jacob panicked and bolted for his car, fumbling for his keys in terror. The sounds of shoes hitting the pavement echoed behind him, and he couldn't help but frantically look in the direction of his pursuer. The man's tongue wagged as he ran straight at him, closing the distance with an alarming speed. Jacob looked away and focused on the keys. The footsteps closed in, and he could hear the moaning now, a pained groan of a man without a jaw. Jacob unlocked the door and scrambled in, thrusting the key in the ignition and starting the car. The man hit the passenger side with a loud thud, his horrible face pressed against the glass. Jacob floored it and peeled out of the empty lot, leaving the running man behind. As he drove away, he watched the man chase him, running as hard as he could. He watched him get smaller and smaller until he was gone. He sped all the way home. Pulling into the drive, the face print of blood and drool on the window served as a reminder of the close call. Jacob killed the engine and walked to his front door. He paused when he readied his key, inches from the lock. He heard something, pounding footsteps. He looked down the street, into the darkness past the lamp posts. It looked like someone running. Everybody in town knew that Robin's donut shop was struggling, but none of us could have predicted it closing so suddenly, a new shop springing up overnight and taking its place. The new store proclaimed itself the shapeshifter's costume shop, and everybody in town was visiting it before Halloween. Since I live across the street, I saw them every day, coming and going. With my window open, letting in the cool autumn breeze, I listened as the owner welcomed them at the door. "Hello," he would say to each one, smiling and bowing low. "So, what sort of costume?" And then the door would close, and I would miss the rest. The customer would stay for an hour, sometimes more, and then would leave with a black garment bag slung over their shoulder. A happy, dreamy look on their faces. Every time the same. Finally, my curiosity got the best of me, and I went in for myself. The bell jingled above the door as I entered, and the owner rushed over, looking flustered. Welcome, welcome. Oh my, I'm so sorry, but I'm with another customer at the moment. Perhaps you would like to browse for a few minutes." He was glancing over his shoulder nervously, and I heard something loud from the back. A sharp banging noise. "Sure," I said. "Take your time." He looked relieved and thanked me profusely, quickly rushing to the back again, where the noises stopped immediately. I browsed the selection for a few minutes, looking at costumes of vampires, ghosts, mummies, and other ghoulish outfits. None of them were very interesting. Part of me was beginning to wonder why this store was so popular. A brief, stifled scream struck my ears from the back. It was cut short, and I wasn't entirely sure if I'd heard what I thought I'd heard. Maybe it was just the sound of a squealing door hinge that needed a bit of grease. My curiosity grew as the seconds turned into minutes. I decided I would go back and see what was taking the owner so long. Pausing at the door to the back room, I looked inside. The owner of the store was running a blade down the spine of a tall, obese man. I recognized it was Jim, the local butcher. His eyes were staring off into space and drool was running down his chin. He pulled Jim's flesh off of his body, like a jiggly tan leather jumpsuit, and began to step into it. Hey, he cleared his throat. Little help, please. Another man stepped out from the shadows, identical to him. He walked up behind him and stitched up his back with thread. The illusion was grotesquely realistic. He had completely become Jim the Butcher, and there was another doppelganger to take his place and run the store. No wonder the place had such good reviews, and its perfect Yelp rating should have been a dead giveaway. So, anyone got any good homemade costume suggestions?
Is this enough blood? I feel like there should be more. What do you think?
I ask my friend Cam. His face is buried in his phone again. He doesn't look up.
Yeah, it's good. Do you mind finishing up without me? Tammy is waiting too. Well, you've got this, right?
Yeah, no problem.
I sigh.
Just leave the keys so I can lock up.
Sure. See you tomorrow then.
He shoves the keys at me, and he's out the door before I can respond. Now I'm alone in Hollow Hill's haunted house. When we were kids, this place was such a thrill. I must have been stupid to think volunteering us to put on the haunted house this year would rekindle a flame that had died out before high school. I'd gone from his best friend to just a friend to just his neighbor. Now I'm just a bother to him. It's a miracle he agreed to help at all. I glare at the zombie display I've been toiling with. More blood, I decide, swallowing the lump in my throat. Frack you, Tammy. You might have Cam, but you're not going to ruin this for me. I walk outside to the barn, where all of the decorations are stored, rummaging through a few boxes before finding the one I'm looking for. I toss my purse inside and carry everything toward the house.
This place open.
The voice startles me. The box falls to the ground as I whirl around. There's a man standing there in dark clothing. Something about him seems off.
Not until Halloween.
I stammer, backing away. He looks at the box I've dropped.
Need a hand. I'll just bring this inside.
I don't wait for him to finish. I bolt. My instincts are proven correct as I hear him running after me. I slam the door, locking it behind me. A moment later, he crashes into the frame, pounding against it and yelling profanities. My heart drops as I hear my ringtone from outside. Shit. My purse. The keys are out. They're with my phone. Oh, please, don't let him find. The lock turns, and I freeze. The door opens, and a sinister grin greets me.
You can't hide.
I stumble away, shocked to feel strong arms closing around me. I glance back and scream. The mannequin I've dressed as an evil clown is holding me, shielding me, and protecting me. The clown swings a rubber knife that somehow slices through the man's sleeve. His eyes grow wide as he raises the arm that now has turned to plastic. My protector slashes down again and again, making flesh into plastic. In my peripherals, I see the other decorations moving toward him with arms outstretched and weapons raised.
Wow, this looks great.
Cam says, taking in the gruesome scene.
How did you even come up with this?
Sometimes, these things just arrange themselves.
I reply, gazing at the scattered mannequin limbs and shredded pieces of clothing. My eyes settle on the severed head the clown is holding.
Definitely enough blood.
Cam chuckles, and I couldn't agree more. This is going to be a special Halloween. The doorbell dinged for the 100th time as Cindy dashed toward the door. "People," she muttered, adjusting her obito mask so she could see better. She peered through the eye hole and sighed. Cindy could see someone wearing a hockey mask and a trench coat standing there, hands deep in pockets. Immediately, she knew who it was. She opened the door. "There you are, Ezra." She pulled his arm. "The best costume is gonna start soon. You know what that means. Every other Halloween at the Kimmel household, there's a costume contest the high schoolers Kimmel twins host for their friends. Their parents would be out of town by then. It was a small town, and this year's no different." Cindy towed Ezra across the living room and sat him down upon the couch. "Maybe you'll win this year," she said with a smile. For as long as Cindy had known Ezra, she saw him as the weird kid who tried so hard to impress people. He was a smart young guy too, yet so unappreciated. She also sniffed something funny. Part of the costume, Cindy heard Ezra say from behind the mask. Cindy then excused herself. A few minutes later, the living room was crowded with friends. And music, specifically Lost Boy, was already playing in the background. "Anyone who wants to participate has to line up," Cindy's brother Leon said. "After that, we'll take a vote on who has the best costume." "What's the prize for this year?" Allie Kane asked. "All-you-can-eat buffet," Cindy said. "Even better, Universal, in Florida." After some mixed reaction, Leon explained, "They'll pay for whomever wanted to go." Some more mixed reactions came, to the point Cindy had to say something. "Remember," she said, "have fun, everyone." The reactions were a little better, and soon participants lined up from the kitchen to the living room. The first was Ron Warlow. His skin was powdery white, and his eyes glinted red. "So Ron, are you a zombie?" Cindy asked with a blank face. "Hell, no." Ron was offended. "I am Edward flipping Cullen." Cheers and laughter filled the room. Next in line was Ash Baylor, dressed as a skunk. Her big, bushy tail knocked over a vase. Then came Timmy Osborne, who was a poor-looking Teletubby. He was using his smartphone taped to his stomach and wearing a crown of lengthy wires, hands wearing oven mitts. And Johnny Hill had to tell them he wasn't just wearing a nice suit, he was Obama. Several people later, Ezra was next. The room quieted. "Aren't you hot?" someone asked. "Remove the mask." Cindy approached him. "You've worn that since you got here," she asked. "Aren't you uncomfortable, Ezra?" "Don't bother Cindy." Leon raised a beer. "He's too shy." Cindy ignored him and faced Ezra again. "Come on, take it off. It's just us." Not long after, Ezra removed his hockey mask. Cindy shrieked, staggering backwards. Two bloody empty eye sockets greeted her, with scars on his cheeks, and fresh blood dripping on the floor. He uttered, "Am I the winner?" It comes back every Halloween, but this year, I'll be ready. No matter what disguise it wears, I'll recognize it. I'll know it by the way it moves, that slither in its step, how it never blinks or breathes or rushes. No, it's patient. A waiting watcher who knows how to blend into a crowd. This year, I'm going to kill it for good. I've done my research. I'm still not sure what the creature is exactly, but I do know almost every culture seems to have a story about it. A number of solutions are suggested. There are preventative measures, defenses, running water, circles of salt, Certain names you can carve into stone, or burn in wood, or tattoo in blue ink. I put all of that in place over the last few months, but it's not enough. Protection is not enough. I have to hunt. Silver, wood from a weeping willow. Bullets transcribed with Bible verses. Fire. Always fire. I've tried all of the mundane methods. Guns and knives don't work. Neither does drowning or strangulation. At least, they don't work for long. You might stop it 1 year, but it will come crawling back, the next with a new face. A new mask. Last year it looked like a knight. A small knight with plastic armor and a wooden sword. It thought it was clever, hiding in plain sight. But I saw right through it. Last year was the first time I tried fire, but I know where I made my mistake. I didn't let it burn long enough or hot enough. There was still something recognizable left over, a child-shaped lump of charcoal. This year, I'll fire it down to the ash, and then scatter the fragments in holy places. Lovely places, perhaps the ocean, some dust tossed into the water, and some mixed with the sand. And when the sun rises, it will wash everything clean, a bright tide ebbing and flowing across the sky. I'm not sure what it will look like when it comes back this Halloween. It might hide inside a family, like a cuckoo slipping in among magpies. The parents won't understand that it's replaced their child, or the child won't understand that it's only wearing the form of their parent. That's its greatest strength. It makes you love it. And no matter how many times I kill it from year to year, it always finds a way to return. But not this year. This year, I'll be ready. This year, there will be nothing left. Nana Nettles was a mean old woman that lived at the end of the street and loved to scare kids on Halloween. Mom always warned us never to go to her house when we trick or treat, and for a good solid 12 years, I did that. I would sometimes hear about kids that did go, and usually they would claim they weren't even scared. She's really nice. In fact, I would say she gives out the best candy, they would say. I figured now that I was a teenager, it would be a lot safer. After all, she is probably in her mid-90s, and I'm 5'5". What could she do to me? So when my mom told me that I had to take my little brother trick or treating, I decided to make Nana Nettles our first stop. The house was big. It's always seemed like there was no way that she could live alone. But it was so empty. Trash in the yard, everything overgrown and gray. If she wanted to pass the place off as being haunted, it wouldn't be hard to convince anyone. I thought we weren't supposed to go here, my little brother Joey said as he tried to pull away. That's just a story. My friend Briley says that she has the best candy on the block. So come on, scaredy cat, I told him as I got up to the front door and knocked loudly. There was no answer. I peeked inside the room and tried to get a good look. I couldn't see anyone. Then the door creaked open just a smidge. Come in, dearies. I have enough candy for both of you. A voice said. Hello, I said as I pushed the door open. There was no one there. The house looked like it hadn't been lived in for quite some time. But then as the door opened wider, I could smell the stench of death. And I saw Nana Nettles in the recliner. Or at least, what was left of her. Skin rotting away, muscle turned to sludge, her bones black and moldy. A hollow shell of the woman that once lived here. I screamed and ran all the way home, not even bothering to look back. And like an idiot, I didn't check to be sure Joey was following me. I trekked back to the house, certain whatever evil lived here had swallowed him up. "Joey, are you in there?" I shouted. Silence. Then I heard this satisfied burp. I looked inside and saw a silhouette hovering over Nettle's corpse. It was Joey. He had torn back the scalp from the corpse's skull and was dipping his fingers into her goopy brain, licking them off as he chowed down on what was left of Nana Nettles. When he saw me, his eyes sparkled with playful glee. "You were right. This really is the best candy," he slurped. Then he smiled hungrily. "I think I need more." When I saw the ad online, it drew me in.
Spooky deliveries. It read, "Scare your friends this Halloween. Order now, supplies limited."
I clicked on it. There was one friend of mine who had always played pranks on me. Greg had been messing with me since high school, and I never seemed to be able to get him back. This was my opportunity. Typing in his personal information and his address, I filled out the form. Most of it was straightforward, but then it got weird. Biggest fear, the form asked. Then it wanted to know more intimate information. It asked where his kids went to school and where his wife worked, what sort of car he drove, and how often he checked his tire pressure. I figured it was all part of the gag, so I put in some answers, not paying very close attention to the questions or the details. I guess the biggest one they wanted to know was what he was afraid of. Greg was afraid of clowns, I told them, thinking they'd send a guy to his door dressed in a clown suit. That's what I imagined, based on the $50 price tag. But figured it would likely be something even more mundane than that, like a poster or a cardboard cutout of Pennywise. Never would I have suspected what they sent. A kill squad of clowns. Greg called me the following day from his office, his voice high-pitched and hysterical.
"What did you do? They said you sent them."
"What?" I asked, with a bite of apple in my mouth. Then I remembered the form I had filled out. "Oh man, I got you good. Finally I got you, but it's just a gag." "What is it?" "A guy in a creepy clown outfit." Then I heard the sounds of a chainsaw in the background, revving and hacking, sawing away at something. Screams ensued.
"They killed everyone,"
he said quietly.
"The whole office. Everyone. They're all dead."
"What did you—" His words were cut off as the phone line went dead. I thought he was messing with me. God help me, I thought he was kidding around. Damn, that must have been a good scare for him to try to prank me like that right afterwards, I said to myself. Maybe I'll give my wife a good fright as a joke. I filled out the online form once again, this time inserting my own home address, and including my wife's biggest fear, spiders. Of course, now I know that Greg wasn't messing with me. I'm guessing he really did get attacked by an insane clown posse armed with chainsaws, especially considering the state of my house. We woke up this morning surrounded by spiders. They've covered the bedroom in thick blankets of webbing, cocooning my wife so she can't move. They are everywhere. Thousands of them, millions. I should have known this was a bad idea. My worst fear is spiders too. Mr. Johnson has the best Halloween decorations in town. Every year his place is consistently the scariest. I can't wait to see what he does this time around. I remember the first year, when he had just moved in. The skeleton army he assembled was incredible. And the way they danced and sang songs, playing their rib bones like xylophones, it was an absolute riot. Nobody could figure out how he put it together, but word got out that he was a retired special effects expert who had worked on big-name Hollywood horror movies. Not that it was ever confirmed, but that seemed like the most rational explanation. I think that was around the same time all those kids started disappearing. Come to think of it, and the same year all the graves at the cemetery were found excavated. Claw marks around the fresh-turned earth, as if people had dug their way out from beneath the soil. Mr. Johnson sure was happy after that Halloween. He was practically glowing, with a purple light, which followed him around like an aura. The skeleton army stuck around too, and did yard work and house cleaning for him. They even shoveled his driveway that winter. Anyways, the next year everybody was anxious to see what Mr. Johnson would come up with. Sure enough, he surprised us all again. His house was covered in giant spider webs on October 31st, although nobody had seen him putting them up. Not only that, but massive spiders were crawling around on them. Huge black things with hairy legs and red diamonds on their bellies. You had to be pretty brave to approach the house that year. I certainly wasn't. A lot of kids weren't in school. The next day, I noticed. And I never saw them again after that. Pretty weird, I guess. But people do move away, my parents said. Nothing to be concerned about. The spiders were a little concerning though. They multiplied and started nesting all over town. We're still dealing with them as best we can. But nobody blamed good old Mr. Johnson. We wouldn't have dreamed of it. This Halloween is getting closer by the day, and everybody is whispering nervously about Mr. Johnson. What will he do this year? The whole town is excited, but also anxious awaiting the 31st. Luckily, Mr. Johnson surprised us all again. He passed out pumpkins all over town, telling us they were very special gourds and that we should keep them indoors and close to our beds at night. They'd be part of his Halloween surprise. A very special surprise that we will all surely love. The baby pumpkin is so cute. I always wanted one. And it sits next to my bed as I type this right now. Oh, wait, maybe not. Where did it go? I can hear skittering noises from beneath the bed. Something crawling up my leg, up my back and neck, and biting the flesh at the base of my skull. Yes, it is true, I always wanted one, but not as a head. The doorbell sounded, and I pressed my face to the door. I inhaled deeply, convulsing at the scent wafting through it. I opened up to behold the boy. He was hiding beneath a white sheet, jagged holes cut into it, through which to see. His father stood by his side. They stared up at me, their inquisitive expressions tinged with apprehension. "Love the costume," the man said to me, squeezing the young one's shoulder. "Slightly overboard, but very convincing." I stretched out a pale hand until it hovered above the pumpkin bucket. The child held up gingerly and dropped a neatly wrapped bonbon into it. They wasted no time in leaving, eager to go collect more candy from houses down the street. There was still ample time. It was early. Around half an hour ticked by before someone else knocked. I swung the door open in a flash, gazing upon the girl that had turned up on my porch. A pair of fangs protruded from under her lip. She was alone. Her features were contorted in a mix of wonder and perplexity. She cleared her throat softly and beamed at me with anticipation, her cheeks rosy. I extended another slimy hand and let yet another embellished piece of confectionery fall into the faltering paper bag she presented me with.
"Thank you,"
she chirped before skipping off into the sunset, her black cloak waving in the air behind her. It was a shame her bones showed so clearly, I thought to myself as I closed the door gently. My stomach gurgled. I hadn't had a meal in so long. I stopped pacing when the bell rang again. Darkness had descended outside by then. I opened the door once more, laying my eyes on a new boy. This time, I smiled. His eyes went wide immediately. His goodie bag hit the ground, its contents scattering. I had nothing to give this one. Quite the opposite. I threw all four hands forward, each anchoring its dozen appendages firmly into the boy's head, and yanked him in before he could react. I slammed the door shut and turned off the lights in the hall, so that trick-or-treaters would know I wasn't handing out anything anymore. My evening was over. The boy thrashed violently. I liked it better when they put up a fight. He bit as hard as he could with his blunt little teeth. That didn't hurt whatsoever. They were nothing like mine. Regardless, I always started by removing them, all before tampering with my food further. Not that I was particularly fussy, or that they were inconvenient in any way. I just didn't much care for their bland taste and measly crunch. Same could be said for his pesky nails. I dragged the squealing thing into the depths of the house. Its screams would never make it past the thick oak front door. There was no escape once I had you. Every last one of my mouths was going to be fed. "Do you need help, miss?" I glanced up from my phone to notice the man offering to help the girl pry the train window open. "No. Stay away," she shouted, continuing to wrestle with the window latch. He put his hands up in defensive confusion and went back to his spot a few rows back. I assume she was concerned about anyone getting that close to her baby, who was bundled in the carrier next to her on the seat. She finally wrenched it open. Then she turned, picked up the baby, and flung her out the window. I screamed at the same time as other onlookers. A few people ran on the platform in the direction the baby had flown, hoping, I imagined, to stop the train and get outside. I thought to push the emergency button at the same time that another person pushed an identical one on the other side of the train. Everyone was shouting, but the girl did not acknowledge anyone around her. She sat in her seat and cried uncontrollably. There were 7 of us called to serve as witnesses in her trial. I had not been on another train since that day, but it was my only way to San Antonio. I sat in silence the entire ride. I'd avoided the news about it, not wanting to be brought back to that horrible moment. But I'd heard a number of things, and still couldn't understand why she did it. Especially because I'd spent the last year wanting a baby so badly. We'd spent so much money on fertility treatments, while she had the nerve to be ungrateful. Why would she even have a baby if she was going to do this? The prosecution showed that she was a wreck of bad decisions. Her parents had had to hold her under lock and key. when they'd caught her trying to flee the state. With the baby now born, they had been sending her to Sanderson that day to stay with relatives going forward. A public denouncement of what they saw as a sin. Whoever the father had been, she had never told a soul and refused to name him on the oath, instead glaring at the lawyer while wiping away angry tears. She refused to answer most questions, sulked, gave insults. The jury members each held her in a spurning gaze. I secretly wondered if even her public defender was on her side. It seemed odd that he let her testify. I tuned out whatever the defense said, too upset and too in my head about the fact that I'd have to speak. I went up and plainly said what had happened, giving similar answers as the other witnesses. The jury deliberated for 6 minutes. When they led her away in handcuffs, she screamed,
"I didn't want her. I was raped. I didn't want to have her."
Her voice finally faded away. We discovered the laughing willow deep in the woods on a chilly Halloween night. We had lamented that the holiday was no longer fun, now that we were in the stage where trick-or-treating was too childish, but partying was for older kids. Not the type to let anyone take a festivity from us. We decided to wear our costumes and go to the forest to tell campfire stories. I used the dark red velvet fabric grandmother had given me and made myself a gothic vampire cloak. I packed ingredients for s'mores. Anna dressed as a werewolf and Zori as a mad scientist, and we set off into the woods together. We went far off path, the moonlight breaking through tree canopies to guide us, and we made up creepy songs along the way.
"It's crazy there aren't that many Halloween songs,"
Anna remarked.
"Yeah, there's Thriller, and what, like, the Monster Mash,"
Zori said. "Oh my god, you've heard the Monster Mash?" I asked.
"Yeah,"
they both answered. "Nope. You've heard that one song about the Monster Mash, but you haven't heard the actual Monster Mash," I pointed out. We all giggled, and the feeling in the air shifted as we heard another voice. A laugh like the green of the forest gushing about its crush. A chime as if mischief were trying to wave you down and hug you hello again. We saw her at the same time. Her long leaves swung in the wind. We clasped hands as we stepped closer. She was mesmerizing, and we fell into her spell. We made wishes and she made them come true, indulging our most feral fantasies. Anna held under the moon, and Zori lacerated corpses, and I sunk my teeth into flesh and drew sweet blood. We played with fire, toasting the marshmallows to perfection, while we danced inside the flames. The willow laughed, and so did we. I knew we'd be there together forever. In the morning, I woke up at home covered in dirt and ashes, with a sense of giddiness in my body. Then I read Anna's text.
"Let's go back tonight."
We couldn't get a hold of Zori, and we couldn't find the willow again, nor on the next night or the next. Every attempt left us more lost. It wasn't until Zori's vigil that we pieced together the truth. Magic comes at a sacrifice, and the willow's price was our very flesh. Anna and I returned on the next Halloween. We frolicked in the willow's world of spinning branches and earthy mulch. We sang a song with a forest symphony. We spun, holding hands, marveling in the gorgeous gold at the eye of the windstorm of leaves. We made wishes and she whispered, yes. Now, almost a year later, and it's just me now. It's Halloween soon. I'm not scared. I will venture out to visit the laughing willow, and I will laugh along as she pulls me in. Jack-o'-lanterns, pillowcases, backpacks, plastic bags. As long as it fits treats inside, it's fair game to use for collecting candy on Halloween. Even so, my best friend Artie always took the cake for having the absolute weirdest choice in Halloween sweet holders. A bronze, metal diving helmet. Each and every October 31st since I'd known him, he'd lug that clunky bowl around with him to all of the houses on our lane. I was always curious about his reason for this impractical choice, but my mama taught me not to pry, so I never pressed my neighbor on it. Like any year before, the two of us set off trick-or-treating together, me dressed as a fairy princess, and him dressed as a Lego brick. You know, Artie, your costume doesn't really match your candy bucket, I suggest, watching him scrape the heavy helmet along the pavement beside us. Artie just shrugs, tossing a handful of new candy into the darkened opening of the helmet.
Matching is overrated.
As we depart our sixth house of the night, I catch sight of the last person I want to see here. Jet Branson and his gang of thugs, scouring the street for candy as well. Unfortunately, the neighborhood bully and his posse corner us as we're leaving.
You two losers look terrible this year, obviously.
He snickers coldly, waving his overflowing pail of candy at us.
Still dragging that huge diving helmet around like a total dog, Artie.
Leave him alone, I defensively shout, to no avail.
Know what? I've been thinking that helmet bucket of yours will make the perfect addition to my nautical costume.
It's here that I notice Jet is wearing a deep-sea diver costume this year, albeit a cheap one made out of cloth and Velcro rather than metal and glass. Jet lurches forward and grabs the helmet from Artie, wrestling it from his grip and knocking Artie to the floor. Tossing aside the cheap fabric hat from his own costume, the bully immediately begins fastening Artie's helmet onto his head, while his friends cheer.
It's okay, Millie,
Artie whispers reassuringly as I help him up.
I don't care about candy anyway,
I bark in confusion. Then why do you collect it in that diving helmet each year? Who's the candy for?
It's for my pet,
Artie explains.
See, my granddad was a real deep-sea explorer. One time he brought back a sea monster with him.
I ponder if my friend is being serious, or if that fall to the ground affected his brain. What do you mean brought back a sea monster with him? Brought it back in what?
Oh.
Several feet away, Jet utters a muffled, tortured scream from inside the helmet. Then the glass viewplate splatters with his blood as the aquatic creature, still nestled within, devours his head. Mina and Alex's costumes arrived on the day of Halloween, just in time for trick-or-treating. At the ripe old age of 15, there had been discussion on whether they should go trick-or-treating. But their love of all things Halloween had overridden such concerns, and they had gone ahead and ordered costumes. Plus, the new online pop-up Halloween shop, Become What You Wear, Halloween costumes for the truly daring, had such amazing costumes. How could they resist?
Am I going to literally become a corpse bride?
Alex was almost hysterical with excitement by the time they got to their costume. Mina shook out her glittering black and blood-red dress, shrieking,
"And I will be a demon. Tell me your true desire."
The darkening streets were filling with children when they finally went outside. The advantage of trick or treating as an older teen was that moms couldn't believe them to put on a jacket, and their costumes were on full display. Yet, unlike their friends, Alex and Mina were not shivering by the time they cut up. Alex was a stunning, ethereal corpse bride. Bugs with wriggling, spindly legs festooned their long, matted hair, and a thick brown worm jutted out of one eye, the other lavishly made up. Their tattered white gown was covered in creatures, which appeared to be crawling on their long skirt with its torn train, dragging along ground. Mina had a flayed demon face, and blood dripped from the horns, jutting up from her skull. Their friends paused when the two creatures joined them.
Alex, is that worm actually moving? Wow, how did you do that?
Exclaimed Javed, who had a bit of a crush on Alex, and he stretched out a hand towards the worm, wriggling around their eye socket. Alex slapped back Jave's hand sharply and yelled,
No touchy.
Jave sprung back as if stung, and in fact the ice of Alex's touch more than the blow itself hurt his flesh. Mina slowly turned and fixed her glowing eyes on Javed.
Javed, tell me, what do you most desire?
The group of teens all burst out laughing.
Alex, of course. He wants to do that.
But Javed wasn't laughing. He said loudly,
I want to kill Mrs. McNeil.
Although Jave's ongoing feud with Mrs. McNeil, the science teacher, was not a surprise, an uncomfortable silence fell. Jave turned to Paul, the group's vicious psycho.
Come on, Paul, let's go. You know where she lives, right?
Paul nodded, and the two left the group. A couple of the other boys and one girl followed them. The rest stared at each other and then moved slightly away from Alex and Mina, standing in their terrifying glory before them. Mina growled at them.
Well, idiots. Aren't we going trick or treating?
With no further pause, Alex and Mina started walking towards the nearest house, and their friends fell in line and followed them obediently.
It's once a year, come on.
The skeleton boy snuffed his bony toe in the dirt. Beside him, wearing nothing but a shabby dress, shuffled Mary Sue.
We can't. If the great girl finds out, we'd be in for it.
Mary Sue rubbed at the decaying flesh on her arm. Pieces of it flacked to the cemetery floor.
I think if we stood up to him, we could get out. Just for one night,
said a tall, thin man standing in the shadows.
I'd love to see my loved one again. See, let's just do it.
The skeleton boy bounced, rattling his bones.
It is Halloween after all.
More of the assembled dead concurred with his statement. If you walked past the old graveyard, you wouldn't see the shadows, but the cemetery was teeming with undead.
You may be too young to remember Anna Frail,
wheezed an old skeleton, his leg bone held together with a mottled bandage.
But I sure do.
The group nodded again.
But what about all those people?
A voice scratched out. The little old witch pouted, wart on her nose wiggling with its own life.
The attraction will open soon. He expects us to work. It's not right,
boomed a disembodied voice.
The great girl keeps us here, just for his financial gains. I say we kill a few of them, and have done with it. Now we're talking,
bounced the skeleton boy. From out of the shadows came a rotund man, a pocket watch in his hand.
What are you all doing?
Get in your positions. The gates open in a minute.
We don't want to,
shouted the skeleton boy.
And you can't make us.
The great girl's cheeks grew red, and he stuffed his pocket watch back in his waist pocket. Can't I? He laughed. Need I remind you, boy, that come the morning, I can dig you up and scatter you to the four winds.
The ghouls shrank back, each knowing the threat was real. A whisper sprung up on the breeze, and a frail. The great ghoul came to the boy and turned his head to face the growing crowd.
You see that? That's the sound of money. Money that keeps you all safe inside my walls. I'm helping you, can't you see that?
The ghouls shrank back again. Some disappeared, muttering about unfairities, to find their spots for the Halloween attraction. I won't do it. The air thinned as the great ghoul's shoulders sagged. As quick as lightning, he snapped the skeleton boy's head off. The body clattered to the cemetery floor.
Anyone else feel the same way?
He looked at them. The skeleton old man pulled out a walking stick and stumbled away. The witch jumped up and scurried off. Mary Sue pulled her shabby dress around her and swept off to the gates. And the rest shrank away in fear.
That's what I thought,
snarled the great ghouls.
Now get into your position. Tonight will be our biggest year yet.
Have you seen a scarecrow have a baby? I have. Last week my mum took me to the town's Halloween harrowing event. I loved the haunted house, which was just a converted barn, the burster pumpkin stand, and the face painting. But my ultimate favorite was the haunted hayride. Mum wasn't so impressed as the actors jumped out and tried to scare us. They weren't allowed to touch us, which I thought was a bit unfair. A good old jump scare is amazing. So halfway through, I got a little bored and wanted to see where these actors were springing from. While Mum was preoccupied with a demon surgeon, bloodied apron, and all, I slipped over the side and ducked into the cornfield. The stalks scratched my face as I barreled inside. It was dark inside too. The sun had set hours ago, adding to the spookiness of the haunt. I heard the sounds of grunts coming from ahead of me. Excitement swelled in my chest as I anticipated meeting the actors in their backstage area. The stalks thinned. My trembling hand pulled back, the last one to a cropped circle. Inside, standing face to face, were two scarecrows. One, a man crow, peeled off its ashen face. It hung limp in its hand as it passed it to the other, a woman crow. Her face was wide like it was screaming, but nothing but riving grunts came out. She reached up and began to peel the top of her face down. Beneath, I saw maggots and worms squirming in holes. Just as she pulled the last of her chin free, something wet dropped between her legs. The scarecrows looked down. The man-crow's face wriggled with parasites as he nudged the thing with his foot. I couldn't control my fear as I realized these things weren't actors at all. It took me a second to realize that the thing on the floor, all wet with blood, was a baby scarecrow. That's when the mother crow glanced around. I ducked back just in time. Her gaze went around and back to the child. Her knees creaked as she bent down. Slowly she placed the face given to her on her face. The man did the same with the woman's, but now it was frozen in a scream, but supple and expressionless. Trembling, I watched as the child slowly stood. His body was wet straw, completely naked. But his face held my attention. He didn't have one. I shot back again, stumbled, and fell on my bum. The scarecrow swooped around. Willing myself to move, I jumped up and ran straight into my mum. I told her what had happened, but when we looked again, the scarecrows had vanished. That was 2 nights ago. I now know why the Scarecrow boy didn't have a face. He has to get one, and he is outside my bedroom window right now.
When I was a kid, my sister never liked Halloween very much. I loved it, though. Dressing up, pretending to be somebody else. There's nothing like it,
my mom said, looking down at me and smiling. We were walking down the street, heading back home after a long night of trick-or-treating. My feet were getting sore and tired. I was looking forward to being home again, relaxing in front of the television. It was a dark and quiet night, the full moon shining in the sky above. The streets were mostly deserted, and I realized it was getting late. My bag was stuffed full of candy, and I was distracted looking down into the midst of it, tallying up my score, thinking about digging into the sugar-laden pile of snacks as soon as we got home. "Thanks for letting us stay out so late, Mom," I said, pulling a peanut butter O. Henry from my bag and unwrapping it. I was hoping she wouldn't notice. She always insisted on checking the candy before I ate any, wanting to inspect it for poison, tampering, and razor blades. To my surprise, she looked over and saw me stuff it into my mouth, but didn't say anything. She simply smiled, a dreamy look on her face.
"You're such a good boy,"
she said, with vacant eyes.
"Just like your mother."
Something about the way she was looking at me was making the hair stand up on the back of my neck, making me anxious. Her hand was gripping mine, just a little too tightly.
"When we get home, we'll watch a scary movie together. How does that sound, Jason?"
My name isn't Jason, it's Jordan. I wanted to say, the words dying on my lips. I tried again to pull my hand away. It was getting sweaty now, my nervousness reaching my conscious mind long after my body knew what was happening. My legs were suddenly feeling numb and heavy.
How silly. The pills they gave me at the institute, they made my mind a little wishy-washy.
Is that how you're feeling right now, Jason Jordan?
A little wishy-washy.
It was true. That was how I was feeling.
Your mother didn't deserve you. Just like she didn't deserve all the attention she got when we were children. Mother always liked her best.
The woman who I now realized was my mom's twin sister was saying, dragging me towards a car parked at the side of the dark road. She pulled the wig off her head, revealing a bald head beneath the fake bangs. Also a scar which bore the word, betrayed, pink and puckered, and looking like it had been carved into her forehead with a knife, or burnt there with a brand at some point in the past.
"I always loved Halloween,"
she said, shoving me into the car and getting into the driver's seat.
"Dressing up, pretending to be somebody else. There's nothing like it."
Halloween is the best night of the year. Of course, everyone knows that. Christmas Eve tries to compete, but just doesn't hold a candle to Halloween. It doesn't even hold a burning ember. Though I guess I'm a little biased, seeing as we don't have a chimney for an old guy to climb down with free stuff. What we do have, however, is costumes. By we I mean my friends and I. We're all together, all the time. How cool is that? There are 6 of us, the oldest, yours truly, being 12, and the youngest is 4. We can't just go buy costumes on our own because no one would pay us any mind. Which is why we're lucky to have our caretaker. She comes to see us every single day to make sure we're happy and haven't been kidnapped.
She plays with us and keeps our home neat and tidy and helps us get our Halloween costumes. This year we're going as a cat, a skeleton, another skeleton, Spider-Man, a Reaper, and a Scarecrow. These costumes are much better than last year, when all we managed was a gaggle of sheet ghosts. That was both demeaning and annoying because our babysitter for the night wouldn't stop laughing. Costumes are great because nobody needs to see you and nobody asks questions. Even a scary costume isn't that scary compared to lots of other things. But what's a costume without some trickin' and treatin'? That's definitely the best part. With so many and so much time on our hands, seeing as none of us go to school, we get more candy than anyone knows what to do with. It's the funnest time one can have, disguising yourself and demanding sweets from strangers for a solid 4 hours. We're always the first kids to start, and the last to stop trick-or-treating. After all, we gotta make it last. Our caretaker doesn't come with us, because she's busy scaring off the many kids who show up at our home. The candy we get is something else. With a mix of cool older kids and adorable younger kids, no adult can resist throwing all their sucrose at us. The ones that do resist, or give stale raisins or dental floss, get punished. Even subtracting those, there's still a decent haul every year. We used to pool our candy, dumping out our bags into a big pile and taking turns taking pieces. But it's been unanimously agreed that that's stupid. Instead, we trade. A piece for a piece, 3 for a full bar. You can refuse a trade, but no take-backs. There are other rules, but that's the gist of it. We all have to be crafty about it, carefully planning each swap to maximize output. This is the only candy we're gonna get for a while. In fact, it's the only food we'll get to enjoy for most of the year. After all, what's the point of feeding a bunch of dead kids? I was preparing a broth for the supper this evening. The occasion was for my new boss. Needless to say, it was extremely important to make a good first impression. Suddenly, I noticed that a vital element in the broth was missing. I had forgotten to buy some meat. I started to panic when the doorbell rang. I promptly went to answer the door and was greeted by several children screaming, "Trick or treat, treat," I requested eagerly, whilst grabbing the first kid's head and shoving it in the acidic broth. Finally, I had some good quality meat in my dish. The other children screamed in horror as I promptly drank the broth and pissed on them with my acidic piss. They tried to run away, but they were shackled to the roof of the house by their necks. I quickly went to the second child and asked, "Do you know what type of soup this is?" Before he could attempt to respond, I screamed uncontrollably, "Meat soup," whilst shoving his head in the boiling broth. I then chanted my evil spells uncontrollably, which exploded the guts of a third miserable kid. "Do you like dogs?" I next inquired the 3 remaining children. "Yes," they responded hesitantly and nervously, with tears sliding down their cheeks. "Good," I yelled triumphantly whilst releasing my pack of starved Rottweilers. They made short work of the kids, making sure to leave me some work with their brains, and 1 remaining child. I stared at the last pathetic kid and said, "Now it's my turn, trick or treat." His lips quivered whilst tears were pouring out of his eyes. "Treat," he chocked out feebly with his eyes closed. "Okay," I said, "you're free to leave." The kid felt some relief and was hurrying to get away from me. This made me furious. How dare this little shit have such bad manners. I quickly went in my garage and turned on my cement roller. Die, 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 I screamed furiously, whilst rolling him over. He better have learned his lesson. Later, my boss came over to dine. The ambience was nice, the meal was delicious, and my mood was just right. Then the doorbell rang again, when conversing with my boss. How I despised Halloween, and the greedy little children requesting candy. Excuse me, I told my boss, and went to answer the door. 5 minutes later, I came back and my boss inquired, "Is everything okay? And what was that chainsaw sound?" The day after Halloween. Usually, a day filled with adults taking down macabre decorations and getting ready to put up Christmas decorations. Kids eating candy from the previous night's haul. But not today. Today, the whole town seemed frozen. No one could quite wrap their heads around what had happened last night. How could 35 kids go to bed last night and not wake up the next day? How could 35 sets of parents go into kids' bedrooms to find cold, stiff, lifeless bodies? I knew how. It wasn't poisoned candy. It wasn't some mysterious disease. It wasn't the work of a serial killer. It was a debt, come to be paid. The town of Salem, Massachusetts, had always had a debt to be paid. Sins to atone for. The crimes committed against the women of this town hundreds of years ago hung over the town, like a hungry noose waiting to be fed a neck. Ironically, the Puritan men of old Salem had been right. Those women that they accused of witchcraft had made a deal with the devil. But that deal was only made after the accusations had been cast and their fates had been sealed. 35 women of Salem, about to be murdered for crimes they had not committed, made a pact. If their God did not intervene, then they pledged their souls to Satan in exchange for a favor. The favor was this: when the town of Salem had all but forgotten them, take from them 35 innocent lives, just as theirs had been taken. And now in modern-day Salem, things hadn't changed. A witch hunt was about to begin to find someone to blame for the deaths of the children. And so does the cycle repeats.
Please subscribe, or the toxic skull will come for you.